What's going on YouTube? It's Teach back again with another video, and today we're talking about the remaining free agency crop. There's some good names still out there, and I'm going to try to predict where I think maybe a good fit is. I don't have any, inside information. I'm not in with the front offices or these guys or agents, obviously. So this is not me saying this is where they're definitively going to go, but this is based off of what I've seen, what I think a good fit would be, and, just overall what would make the most sense in my head canon. But because of that, I could obviously be wrong, so let me hear it down in the comment section. Tell me some of the top free agents or where you think they should sign here before we get into training camp and maybe during camp and after camp itself. Also, these names include who I think are the best free agents out there, and then a couple other names sprinkled in towards the end to, provide an extra linebacker and throw in a wide receiver because there wasn't one. So try to make it even, try to make it balanced. But overall, the first batch of players in here are the ones I would deem the most, talented out on the free agent market. But hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you do, please hit that like button. They would help me out a ton. And if you're new to the channel, want more sports content like this, please consider subscribing. And again, comment your thoughts down below. Give me some predictions in the comments section. Without further ado, we're going to start with one we're going to move pretty quickly on just because of the recent legal situation for Richard Sherman. To me, he's probably the top free agent. Him or David DeCastro we'll talk about next. But unfortunately, with the burglary charge, that more so seems like a breaking and entering situation. More reports have made it clear there was a family member's household and he was intoxicated and threatening suicide, which is obviously a very serious issue, and it's one that hits my heart very close. So sorry, Cowboys fans, I think he'd be a great fit for you, but we are going to move past this pretty quick. I think he would provide a veteran presence that would help out the likes of Trevon Diggs and Kelvin Joseph, who I know Joseph is someone who a lot of people like, and I like to go into the combine, but rookie cornerbacks don't always play well right away. I think Diggs kind of encapsulates that from last year, a lot of boom or bust type of situation for Diggs. And obviously Dan Quinn, a good connection there with Richard Sherman. So hopefully the cornerback's able to figure out everything going on in his personal life, and hopefully the legal situation gets resolved with it. And then once that is solved, I think Dallas Cowboys should make the call right away. I mean, you'd have to figure out the cap and how to get him his money, and it'd probably become more of a one-year deal than a two-year deal he was originally looking for, but I think that makes a ton of sense in my opinion. Second name we'll talk about now, David DeCastro. I ultimately think DeCastro is going to retire because of that ankle injury. It was really bizarre, obviously, when the Steelers cut him, but if he didn't get cut and then he retired, the Steelers would still be responsible to pay him, or at least in theory, they probably would. So by releasing him, and now he probably will retire, in my opinion, if I had to guess. It freed up $8.5 million worth of cap space, which is beneficial for the Steelers. We'll talk about them later on in this video. But if DeCastro decides, hey, I'm still good to play, I'd like to continue playing at the NFL level, I think the New York Jets make a ton of sense. The Cincinnati Bengals, good honorable mention here. I just don't know if he'd stay in the division and do that to Pittsburgh, but I think he could stay in the conference, and honestly, there'd be a lot of suitors because he's still one of the best interior offensive linemen. Despite his, degrading play, he's still a really quality option. But the Jets still looking for some answers. Greg Van Roten right now is the right guard. DeCastro clearly better. And then if you add DeCastro, have him next to Morgan Moses, another signing there at right tackle, and then on the left side you have Becton, Elijah Vera Tucker. That is a really appealing and quality offensive line ahead of Zach Wilson, but it also makes the run game easier, right? Whether it's Tevin Coleman or Ty Johnson or the Michael P. Ryan or Michael Carter. They have a bunch of guys in that backfield, and whoever it is will benefit from a much improved offensive line. So the signing of DeCastro to me makes a ton of sense to just try to elevate that offense, and the offense is definitely superior to that of the defense. What breaks that maybe a little bit closer to even is because Robert Saleh is a fantastic defensive mind. He's done a lot with, a little. I think about the 49ers team last year that was banged up and guys out for the year. Injuries just really ravaged that defense, and Saleh still made him into a pretty good unit. So he can do a lot with little, but if you sign DeCastro, that offense is fantastic. Additionally, they have a ton of money to spend. They could have it roll over to next year, but hey, $25 million in cap space, go ahead and spend it. Third name we'll talk about, Justin Houston, a reunion with the Kansas City Chiefs. This is obviously where Houston got his start, and he was fantastic. He was awesome. Him and Tamba Hali, man, those bring back some fond memories of my early football viewing days early on in my life. So I'd love to see him go back to Kansas City, and he would fill a big role. It looks like Frank Clark could face up to like 3 years is something I read the other day. So obviously that's another really serious situation I'm not going to dive into because I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert in that field. But if they don't have Frank Clark, they could flex out Chris Jones to that DN spot, but it's not necessarily ideal. But you could also do that and still bring in Justin Houston, because then in like a 3rd and 12 passing situation where you know the opposing team's going to have to throw the ball, you could have Jones and Houston as the opposite DNs, and then on the interior, Derek Nottie, who's more of a run stopper, but improving as a pass rusher, and then Jaron Reed, who you signed this free agency. And that front four is really appealing, and it'll get the job done on a high level. So I think the signing of Justin Houston makes a ton of sense. Maybe they're looking at Melvin Ingram. I know they visited him as well, but this time I deferred to the familiarity between Kansas City and Justin Houston, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And now we will talk about Melvin Ingram, and maybe Ingram does go to Kansas City and Houston goes to Indianapolis. You could switch either one of these, but I have Ingram signing with the Colts. The Colts have some cap space, and they've been reluctant to spend it. Obviously, they're going to have to shell out some big contracts to the likes of Quentin Nelson and Darius Leonard down the line, and obviously really far down the line. Both their safeties are really talented. Some of their wide receivers could emerge, like Michael Pittman, but that's really, really far down the line. Really, the immediate future is Nelson and the likes of Darius Leonard. So maybe they do want to see all that money roll over into the future. And if they do, I guess I can't really knock it, but so much. But if they're willing to give out a couple $1 million, Ingram is not commanding a large market right now, and they can get it for pretty cheap and still have a large part of that $14+ million roll over. But then they get a veteran pass rusher this team needs. Like Daniel Adangbo, probably not playing until December is what I've seen. And Kwity Paye, I think, has a high upside, great athlete. Liked a lot of what I saw last year at Michigan, despite not having an insane sack total or even pressure total. But that said, he will take time to get to that point. And I think you'd be a little foolish to think he's going to immediately make that jump forward, especially for an Indianapolis team that, to put it frankly, has not done a good job developing pass rushers. That has been an area they've tried to draft in the mid-rounds, and it just has not panned out. Kind of similar to what's going on in Minnesota. So you bring in Melvin Ingram, and he could be the focal point, the main pass rusher, and that makes it hopefully a little easier for Kwity Paye. And then when you get Deo Adangbo back, he becomes a rotational piece, but also for Paye and Odangbo and plenty of the other young guys still on the roster. Melvin Ingram's a great mentor, and he feels like a guy who gets along with everybody. Look at the tandem him and Joey Bosa had. He was there when Bosa was drafted, so like to think he played some part of Bosa becoming maybe the most talented pass rusher in football right now. So obviously a lot of the talent resides in the body of Joey Bosa, and he's just a stud in general. But you got to think Ingram had a hand in there somewhere. So if you're Indianapolis, I think bringing in Ingram makes a ton of sense. Use a little bit of that cap space, though. I know you're trying to save it and bring it over into next year. Next thing, we're going to talk about former Pittsburgh Steelers Steven Nelson. I think the Buffalo Bills or the Arizona Cardinals, called the Cards, an honorable mention here, but Buffalo's been looking for a cornerback too. Remember when they signed Josh Norman? And Norman just hasn't been that guy in a while. And I like Levi Wallace. I like his story, but I feel like that partially blocks what he has become over the last few years. He was pretty solid as a rookie, but after that has definitely petered off. And this is a team that's in win-now mode. And if they add a number 2 good corner and Nelson is solid, I never understood a whole lot of the hate that Steelers fans gave him. I think he was good. Nothing great, not world-breaking. He was definitely better his first year compared to last year in Steel City. But I think he was solid no matter what. And, you have him opposite of Tre'Davious White. That's fantastic. And then you keep Teron Johnson in the nickel. The next thing you know, that secondary looks really, really good. Obviously, a couple of great safeties as well. So I think if you add Nelson and then Levi Wallace becomes your rotational corner, you always need those ready to go out on the sideline. So I think that makes a ton of sense. And I don't think Nelson will command that big of a market. I also do think if he doesn't go, Buffalo or Arizona, I think Pittsburgh's probably thinking about bringing him back just on, a lighter cap hit. I remember when they released him, it was $7.75 billion freed up. That's a lot of money. They might bring him back, but it'd be like on a $2 to $3 million deal or something smaller there. Especially now with the cutting of David DeCastro, they can now afford it. And speaking of the Pittsburgh Steelers, let's go ahead and move on and talk about Brian Poole. And the reason I decided to go Poole with Pittsburgh instead of bringing back Steven Nelson was because, one, I think Cam Sutton is typecast into that slot role because he's not 6 foot. But if you look at PFF slot alignment, 276 snaps in the slot, 206 on the boundary. So pretty close to 50-50 split. And I think he's athletic enough to hold his own on the outside. And then if you bring in Brian Poole, this is more so why I say this. Poole is a great defender against the run. He can hit hard and he can blitz. And with Mike Hilton leaving to go to Cincinnati, that is a big presence that is looking to be filled. And that's a big part of the Pittsburgh blitz scheme. So I think if you bring in Brian Poole, it helps alleviate the loss of Mike Hilton much more than bringing in an outside corner, having Sutton try to be a corner that I don't know if he necessarily is. Time will tell. Maybe they do bring back Nelson and I'm wrong about Sutton, but I think Sutton can play on the outside. I think Poole is closer to what Mike Hilton is, and even if he's not, he is proven to be a very good coverage slot corner. So for a secondary that definitely needs to improve in that area, I think Brian Poole makes a ton of sense, and because of the injuries, and obviously he's still available, it's not going to be a huge contract. It's probably just a one-year prove-it deal, and it's probably a small figure to where, Pittsburgh definitely wants some of this money to roll over next year because they're going to have to pay T.J. Watt, they're going to have to pay Minkah Fitzpatrick, and plenty of other young players on the roster. So they want to have some of that money roll over, but you can't, bank on the future at the expense of the present, and Brian Poole helps fill a huge void. And now we'll move on to another huge void, and this is where I might lose a couple people. I don't normally put a team on here twice, and this might sound like, a Steelers fan venting about the things he wants to see from his team. But I also think Russell Okung makes a ton of sense. If you bring in Brian Poole and Russell Okung for basically the cost of what you freed up after releasing David DeCastro, I think that makes a ton of sense. Like, if you're going to lose an all-pro guard, get better elsewhere. And Russell Okung is an improvement over Chukwuma Okorafor, who I wanted to believe in going into his third year. That's typically when we see tackles and offensive linemen in general make that leap forward. But he was pretty rough at right tackle last year. So not only are we asking him to take a huge step forward in his progression, but we're also asking him to do that while moving from right tackle to left tackle, which is obviously a harder assignment. So I just think making Okorafor more of a swing tackle, you keep Banner on the right side, and bringing in Russell Okung is ultimately better for this team if they want to be competitive and make the playoffs and maybe even try to make a run at winning the division. It's going to be tough with Cleveland and Baltimore in the same AFC North division, of course. But if this team did go out there and sign Brian Poole, it helps alleviate the concerns in secondary. And if you sign Russell Okung, he's going to be solid blindside protector for Ben Roethlisberger, who I think they're still going to try to get the ball out quick, but I think you're going to see more shots down the field, so you're going to need more protection from that left tackle spot, and Okung has proven to be, solid. He's not going to, shatter the world or be fantastic, but he's going to be good, and I don't know if I can say that about Chugs right now. So, ultimately, if Pittsburgh made these two signings with the money they freed up from the DeCastro release, I think it makes a ton of sense, and you might be able to then make an argument this team's better post-David DeCastro release. It's, not easy to say that when you release somebody who's still an all-pro level player, but when you fill in two huge gaps on the roster and then you bring in Trai Turner, who's, good enough, solid replacement to DeCastro, you might be able to argue that because there's less holes, this team is better. But I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comment section. Now we're going to move away from Pittsburgh. I am sorry for doing that, but Geno Atkins to Seattle. And obviously an upgrade over Al Woods, in my opinion. And I think he fits really nice next to Poona Ford, who is a nose tackle, really good against the run. I think still has some pass rush upside to him. But Geno Atkins is a proven veteran, would help probably Poona Ford become a better pass rusher. And Atkins is not the guy where he once was, the best interior pass rusher in the league. That was pre-Aaron Donald, of course. But I think, at least in passing situations, he has a solid role. And this is a team that's going to have to find pass rush wherever he can get it. Carlos Dunlap is probably the best edge on this team, and I know he was really good after he got to Seattle, but asking him to replicate that much success on a 17-game basis and that big of a sample size, I think is a little ridiculous. You're probably looking at a guy who's like 7-8 sack territory, so if you bring in Geno Atkins and he can provide that interior pressure and maybe rub off some on Poona Ford, that interior pressure could rub off and maybe help out the likes of Carlos Dunlap, whoever wins the other starting edge position for Seattle. So I think this signing makes a ton of sense, and because of his injury history, it's going to be cheap. Seattle does have a little bit of wiggle room. They want to see some of that money again carry over, like a lot of these teams. I keep saying that, but because you have to pay Jamal Adams, maybe Quandre Diggs as well. In the looming future, DK Metcalf's going to have to get paid. So they're going to probably want to see some of that money roll over, but Geno Atkins is not commanding the entirety of that $8 million you have left in cap. So I think that signing makes a ton of sense to provide pass rush because, one, that part of the defense this week, but also the secondary outside of the safeties is a huge question mark, and the way you hide bad corners is with a good pass rush. To me, it makes total sense for Geno Atkins to go to Seattle, and the Seahawks should definitely be hitting up his agent now. Next name we're going to talk about is Mitchell Schwartz, a guy who, when he's healthy, probably the best pass protecting right tackle in the game. At least up there. Ryan Ramczyk, of course, in consideration. Lane Johnson's probably a little bit better in the run game than his pass blocker, but he's still a stud. I'm not going to nitpick his game while I, sit and record this in my apartment. So Mitchell Schwartz obviously can still play. It just comes down to, what is his injury status? Is he healthy? And that's something I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm not in the room, not, working with him every day. So I'm basing this off of him being healthy. And for Chicago, I think this would be an awesome signing. If you could have Mitchell Schwartz play 17 games, you could kick Jermaine Ifedi into play guard, which I know he got better at that tackle spot down the stretch last year, but just because he got better doesn't mean he wouldn't necessarily be even better at the guard spot. I think you play him at right guard with James Daniels at left, Cody Whitehair at center. That interior is really solid, and that puts a big smile on the face of David Montgomery. And then you bring a veteran in like Mitchell Schwartz, who's a great pass protector, and that's kind of the weak part of the game for Tevin Jenkins coming out of Oklahoma State. We talked about him being a run-blocking mauler, but not necessarily refined as a pass blocker. Schwartz helps alleviate some of those concerns and coach him up a little bit. But then also, that's a quality bookend tackle duo with Jenkins on the left side, Schwartz on the right. So I think this makes a ton of sense. Additionally, if you're going to have bad tackles, that's kind of a tough division to do it. You're going to face Danielle Hunter a couple times a year. I know the rest of the Minnesota pass rush is kind of hit or miss, but Danielle Hunter's still a stud. And then in Green Bay, an emerging Rashawn Gary, and if not him, Preston Smith can still be quality. He seems to be good every other year, and this is one of those years where if that trend continues, he'll be pretty solid. And then Zadarius Smith is a stud. And then even in Detroit, like Romeo Okwara had 10 sacks last year. And then they beefed up the interior too. That's not necessarily talking about the tackles, but maybe even Trey Flowers gets back to where he was in New England, back into a 4-3 defense. There's reason to think he will. So I think this is a spot where it makes a ton of sense. But again, the big question mark is Mitchell Schwartz healthy? And I don't have an answer there. But if he is, Chicago should definitely hit him up. Next name, Malik Hooker. And this was one I bounced around a little bit with because when you look at Malik Hooker, you have to evaluate him as a rotational safety, which I know sounds kind of ludicrous in that sense that this guy has a ton of talent, and do you pay decent money to a rotational safety? I would argue yes. I mean, look at some of the best safety do it. Look at the two teams in the Super Bowl last year. Kansas City has Tyrann Mathieu, who's a stud, and you can be used in so many different ways. And then they have Juan Thornhill and Daniel Sorensen. So if they want to play Tyrann Mathieu near the line of scrimmage, they bring in Juan Thornhill to be the free safety. Or if they want the Honey Badger playing deep, reading the QB's eyes, they bring in Daniel Sorensen to be your strong safety. And on a similar note, Tampa Bay has Antoine Winfield Jr., who can obviously be used in a lot of different ways. And if they want him to be that in-the-box strong safety, they have Jordan Whitehead to play free. And if they want Winfield to be the deep center fielder free safety, they bring in Mike Edwards to be a box safety. And I ultimately think that's going to be a big sign of things to come in the NFL and where defense is going to start moving. So for Minnesota, you bring in Malik Hooker, who has some versatility to him naturally, but if you want to play Harrison Smith deep where he still has great anticipation and he knows how to read a QB's eyes, he can make plays down the field, you could bring in Hooker to play strong safety. Or if you want Harrison Smith in the box, you could then use Xavier Woods as your deep guy. And overall, I think that rotation works really, really well. And that's how you probably maximize the value of Malik Hooker because he is injury prone. And if you throw him out there all the time as a full-time starter, he's probably not going to make it through 17 games. But if you use him as a rotational piece and he's playing, maybe 50% of snaps or thereabout, he may be able to make it through an entire season. And the talent's never been a question. This dude can play. And then you throw him in a mix with Harrison Smith, who's still really good. Xavier Woods is a quality starter. That's a nice trio of safeties, and it might help bolster up that Minnesota secondary where Mike Zimmer has thrown a ton of resources in. They've signed a bunch of corners to bring in Woods, like we mentioned, and I think Malik Hooker only adds to that group. Okay, two more names to talk about. These two are not necessarily names I'm super fond of, but, I had to get a linebacker in here, had to get a wide receiver. So let's talk about KJ Wright. And actually, KJ Wright's still a good player. I don't mean that in a way to bash him. He's still solid, and it doesn't look like a reunion with Seattle is going to happen. So he should go to Cincinnati, right? They're running this 4-3 defense. I know they said they want to be hybrid, but right now they're constructed as a 4-3. And I think KJ Wright is an improvement, and it helps probably the weakest part of that team's defense. But also, just as a guy who has seen a lot of football, been a part of a lot of winning teams, been a part of winning culture, I think he would do wonders for the likes of Jermaine Pratt, Logan Wilson, Akeem Davis, Gaither, who are the future of that position, at least as it stands right now. They are the future of the linebacking core for Cincinnati. So I think KJ Wright, one, provides you better play at that position right away, but also he could help mentor these guys, and maybe not all three take a step forward and they become really good, but maybe Jermaine Pratt puts it together under the mentorship of KJ Wright, and that is a welcome sign, and that's kind of what you're banking on, right? Like 50% of first-round picks don't work out. So you're looking to try to provide these guys, young players in specific, with situations where they can improve and try to put odds more in their favor. I think signing KJ Wright boosts the chances of these young linebackers improving and becoming quality starters down the line for Cincinnati. So Wright helps them now, but also I think he paves the way and tries to help out the Bengals long-term at that position. Last name we'll talk about, Golden Tate. I originally had the Tennessee Titans because, most of the snaps for Josh Reynolds, I know he gets kind of portrayed as a slot wide receiver. I think he's done that in years past, but most of the time last year, he was actually on the outside, more than 600 snaps as a perimeter wide receiver. But the New Orleans Saints could definitely use any and every wide receiver they could potentially get as an upgrade, right? Like, can't guard Mike. Mike Thomas is a fantastic route runner, one of the best overall wide receivers in the game. I'm not taking that away from him. I know he can be a bit of a troll and he rubs people the wrong way on Twitter, but the dude can play, and you can't take that away from him. But outside of that, are we still saying Traquan Smith's going to break out? Because we've been waiting like 2 or 3 years for that, and I'm done. I'm over it. And they don't really have a defined slot wide receiver. And Golden Tate, if his head's right and he's not causing locker room problems like he had with the Giants, he is a plus level route runner, and he has good hands. So I think for a team that's desperate for wide receiver help, I guess makes a ton of sense. And additionally, Jameis Winston, obviously the turnover issues are a problem, but if you have Mike Thomas who gets open with the best of them, and then Golden Tate who's a quality route runner in a slot, I think that helps maximize what you can get out of Jameis Winston. And you could really see if you're Sean Payton, is this a guy we could roll with down the line? So I think the signing of Golden Tate makes a ton of sense. Obviously, you have to try to clear the personality problems that have arisen in the past for Tate, but if he's got his head on straight and he's ready to help a team, not only would he be, helping an offense that, is a couple wide receivers away from being really, really good in my eyes, but he can play for a contender. And this is a guy who obviously doesn't have a ring, and this could be a chance for him to try to piggyback and, carry New Orleans to that. It would take a lot of things to go their way, but it's not out of the realm of possibilities, and especially with the signing of Tate, it takes away one of the big question marks around New Orleans. But that's going to do it for today's video. These have been my predictions for the top remaining NFL free agents, where I think they should go, some logical destinations and landing spots for them. Comment your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I respond to every comment, so let's talk about some of these free agents down below. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. And if you're new to the channel, want more sports content like this, please consider subscribing. That's going to do it for this one. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.